In about 2014 or 2015, I had the great privilege of interviewing Peter Barry, who I'm sure you all remember, the former Taoiseach foreign minister. And he was getting on at that stage. He died a couple of years later, and I went down to Cork. And it was a little piece I was doing on my news talk show at the time called Musical Heirlooms, where the guest was asked to pick a piece of music and tell a little story about what it meant to them. And it was just a hook, a way of getting into their life story. And Barry's wife's mother knew Percy French quite well, and he visited her house. And the piece that he picked was Gortnamona, which French, of course, wrote when his wife died. And Barry's wife had died a few years previously, and he was broken, absolutely heartbroken. And we put on the piece of music, and he just broke down and wept. He missed his wife so much. And French's piece that he had written for his wife, you know, just absolutely touched him. And it was one of the saddest things I've seen, to see this great man, you know, who had been through so much and was such a rock in the worst of Ireland's times during the Troubles, to see him so sad. And he asked us, would we not include the sound of him weeping in the interview, which we didn't. You know, we preserved his dignity for him. But it was a terribly sad moment, and just, I think, a generational issue, how it shows people nowadays maybe aren't so familiar with French's work, but what it did mean to people at the time was really quite profound. So I'm going to go home and replay that again. So hello, everybody. And yeah, who is my neighbour? Are we up and running? It was. All right. So, okay, I'll keep talking. Well, then maybe one more little word about Roscommon. Isn't it customary for people when they come into a county to say what their connection with it is? Charlie Haughey was always a great man for that. Mine is the Shine family. Donny Shine, who many of you might know, he was manager of the football team at one point, his cousin of my mother's, and we were always so proud to come into Roscommon and visit our cousins, the Shines, who were so well known. So I'm very proud to be in Shine country today. So are we up and running? Great. Angelina's going to be running my slides for me. So the earth is on fire, literally on fire today, and we have to change everything that we do. And this is what I'm often writing in my columns about other people and our fear of other people. And every time we try to improve the world or do something good, other people is our big fear, and we're holding ourselves back. So I just have a few little examples here. Actually, Angela, do you mind if I take this out and then I can see the screen a little bit better, and then I'll know what I'm talking about. So yeah, this is a little village in the Midlands that I won't name. And that's the beautiful school that's built, and it's surrounded by housing estates. But because there's a big wall all around it, when the kids are being brought to school, their parents have to drive them, because it could be a kilometre to drive around the roads to the school, even though they can actually see the school from their housing estates. So it was proposed once that in this little area here, you can see that fence, that they'd put a pedestrian gate into that fence, and it would open for just half an hour in the morning and half an hour in the afternoon, so the kids from the estates could walk into the school. The people who lived in the cul-de-sac at the fence, which is the end of, went completely berserk. I mean, you would think the Red Army tanks, I'm not exaggerating, were going to pull up outside at the prospect of kids walking through that gate into school. And they stopped it. It didn't happen. So all the kids are still driven to school every single morning. It's quite a common phenomenon. It's called permeability, this idea that we want to create the 15-minute city so that people don't have to keep driving everywhere. In housing estates, particularly in Ireland, people are very fond of their cul-de-sacs. So you could have a bus stop outside a wall, but people have to walk a kilometre or more to get to that bus stop. A friend of mine lived in a housing estate where the council had punched a pedestrian gate through a wall, and it turned into this vigilante war between the people in the cul-de-sac who kept blocking up the gate and the people who were trying to get to their buses at 7 a.m. in January mornings. It was terrible. And so just one example of how we don't like this stuff. The next one. Oh, yeah, so this is beautiful. This is Carton Avenue in Maynooth. I don't know if you're familiar with Carton House, and there's a gorgeous avenue going from the town of Maynooth towards the house, and lots of people walk on it for recreational purposes. But Maynooth was expanding, obviously, and there were more housing estates being built up. And what you can't see is on one side, in between the bushes, some of the older housing estates had little gates, and it was a handy way for them to get out straight onto the avenue, again, without having to drive around. A new housing estate was being built on another side, and they were given planning permission to have a gate. Officially, there would be a gate, and it would allow everybody in that housing estate, and again, mostly students, to come down, go through the gate, cross the avenue, and they could walk to the school, a massive school where there were 1,500 students in it. And it would just, again, enable a permeability. People went berserk again, if you show the next one. So, and they had a big protest group, very proud of it. This is them in the St. Patrick's Day parade. Fortunately, they weren't able to stop it because the planning permission had gone through. But a guy who lives in one of the other housing estates told me that everybody in his housing estate sees the people from the other estate walking by, and they go, oh yeah, that's them. They're not one of ours. And all they're doing is walking. There's no antisocial behavior. There's nothing. They're just walking by, and people notice them. What are those people doing in front of my house? They're from the other estate, okay? Now, Olivia O'Leary, I'm afraid, came under my radar, and I had to write about her last year. She wasn't too happy about it. Our national treasure. That's a beautiful picture there of her on the Barrow Walk. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, 130 kilometres, an absolutely stunning, gorgeous walk along the Barrow River. And there was a proposal a few years ago to turn it into a greenway. And I live in Enfield, where the Royal Canal Greenway has changed our lives. I mean, I could never bring my bike out before on the roads. It was simply too dangerous. And now I can go out several times a week, and loads of other people were all cycling on our greenway, and we love it. Olivia led a massive group to protest against the Barrow being turned into a greenway. And, you know, partly I could understand it. I mean, look how beautiful that grassy walk is. And with the greenways, you need some kind of a level, hard surface so that people can use their bikes and things on it. Now, the reason she was mainly against it was because she didn't want these guys, okay? Next up. Yeah. So she's afraid of these guys, right? The Tour de France, the mammals with their bikes crashing down the greenway, you know, frightening everybody, battering all the old women out of the way. Now, I know from our greenway that you don't get these guys. They don't come on the greenway because there are the rest of us plodding along on our little ordinary bikes, and there are people walking, people have dogs, mothers with buggies, all of that stuff. So they don't come on the greenway. They prefer to stay on the roads and hold you all up when you're trying to get somewhere on a Sunday morning and drive you completely crazy, okay? They don't go near the greenways. Who does go on the greenway is this person. So that's my mother, Betty. She's 84, and she's not so good on her feet these days. She's got what she calls the security shuffle. She's afraid she's going to fall. But she cycled all her life in poorer times. She got herself an adult trike, and every morning, herself and my dad get up, and they literally figure out which way the wind is blowing. And he drops her, he's 87, he drops her to one of the bridges on the Royal Canal, and then she can cycle back to Enfield with the wind always at her back. And it's the most wonderful thing for her to do. It's the only kind of real proper exercise that she can get that keeps her going. And she's a real celebrity out on the Greenway. And I remember going down to Graignamanagh to the Barrow, to a little coffee shop that was down there, and there was a few hundred yards of a level surface. So people were coming to this coffee shop, older people. I remember there was a woman in a wheelchair, there was some mothers with prams, and all they could do was get about 200 yards down past the cafe and then turn and come back again. And it wasn't fair. They were entitled to access the beauty of the Barrow Valley and that whole part of the country just as much as anybody who's able to put on their hiking boots and manage an uneven surface. So, again, why are we stopping other people from enjoying life just as much as we can? Have I one more, Angelina? Yeah, so just some examples, you know, of the kind of, you know, these are the faces that we're more used to considering as aliens and as others. We do this to our neighbours, but obviously we're doing it to other people as well. Different races. This poor woman, Helen O'Donoghue, a traveller, you know, because we have our own caste system in this country, you know, let no one deny that. Her life history was just absolutely dreadful. Her father was convicted of the most horrific abuse against her and her sisters. And she said what broke her heart that she never understood was, they were living in this field beside a village, beside a school, and were clearly in the most, being neglected. Like, they'd no shoes, their clothes were filthy, they were hungry, they were thin, and no one came near them. Nobody interfered or said, is everything okay? Are you all right? They weren't going to school. No one showed up to say, why aren't you in school? And she found that very hard, that they were considered so far below and so far outside normal society. No one checked. It's worth reading her story. It's so sad. And yeah, so, our refugees, so we're being very welcoming about Ukrainian refugees. We were not so welcoming, of refugees with a different skin color and a different religion to us. White Christians, I think, seem to be a lot easier for us to absorb. And, and this is what we're doing. People are fleeing other countries, and we're trying to tell ourselves we can't take them. I think we can. What usually happens with refugees, actually, is they don't get too far. They tend to go to the country nearest to them, particularly in the cases of the Far East and in Africa. It just tends to be another poor country. So the country with the largest number of Syrian refugees is Jordan. And I think they've got 1.6 million Syrian refugees or something like that. So I know we're worried about taking in Ukrainians here and where we're going to put them. We know nothing in terms of trying to absorb people fleeing a war, running from the mouth of the shark, as the Ethiopian poet said. So I want to get us to a place is, can we look at people and instead of asking, what country are you from, that we are all from Earth, we're all human, and how can we learn just to see the humanity in people rather than the kind of person that they are. So this is Noam Chomsky. And he's a linguist, and he proposed this theory. Some people kind of dispute it, but it's pretty much the consensus now, that we're born with the structures of grammar in our minds, that we're not just taught a language. Obviously, individually in different countries and in different tribes, we're taught our own language. But the actual structures of language and grammar are actually inherent in our brains. And there's one book I really want to recommend. I interviewed this guy at the Galway Arts Festival some years ago, Us and Them, David Berraby, and it's The Science of Identity. And he goes into a lot of this about how our brains work. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about next is from that book. I just wanted to be sure to credit him first. So when it comes to language, he gives this example of, mockingbird, and what have I said, ingbird mock. We know the second one is wrong. We just fundamentally know that. And a 1-year-old child and a 2-year-old child who can understand what's being told to them, even though they may not be able to speak themselves, knows that the second one is wrong. So it's inherent. A similar process in our brain is mind sight. And most of us understand that you're thinking something quite different to me. So in the case of people with autism, some of those people will lack mind sight. And an example is given of, say, the child with autism who's shown a Smartie box. And they're asked, what do you think is in the box? And they'll say, Smarties. And then the box is opened, and actually there's a pen inside the box. This incident is described in The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. So the teacher says to the child, okay, if your mother came into the room, what would she think is in the Smartie box? And the child would say, a pen. Because the child hasn't separated and understood that the mother's mind is different to his mind. So that idea of a mind sight, that we understand that people think a little bit differently to us, is also inherent. So Berraby's big theory is that kind sight, this impulse, this compulsion that we have to recognize other people as a different kind of person to us, to categorize, to group, to identify people in a certain way and identify ourselves in a certain way, is really inherent as well. And I think it's important maybe to accept that we may not be able to evolve into a higher level of humanity where we never ever group people or categorize them or say, you're a Christian, you're Irish, you're a traveler, whatever it is, that we do have this compulsion to do this, but how can we make it matter less? So he argues that most identities are contrived. We simply make them up. And then what we do is we make them matter. And it's this idea of making them matter that we really need to challenge ourselves on. So to give you a few examples of categories of people that we've made up, there was a group called Cagots, who were kind of people who lived for thousand years in France, and possibly a little bit like travelers. They lived outside the towns, separate from other people. They did the kind of jobs that other people didn't want to do. They were a clearly identifiable group, well known, almost like Jews as well, where they were separated out from other people. A similar group with the Peichong in Korea. But after the French Revolution, they disappeared. Now, they didn't physically disappear. What happened was they were just simply absorbed into mainstream society. So they ceased to be a group that people recognized that were treated in a particular way or that acted in a particular way. They used to only marry each other. They were intermarrying with the rest of society. And they're just gone now. They don't exist, even though they were there for a very long time. The Aryan people, which, as we know, the Nazis made into a major thing, Aryan never existed, that term, before the 19th century, when linguists used it to describe a collection of Sanskrit languages. And then 100 years later, it's been used as an ideology to destroy millions of people. But it never existed before that. It was made up, it was invented, and then it was made to matter. This happens even in medicine. Have I got my... Yeah. So this condition, thymo, which I can't pronounce, I've been trying. So I said, I'll make that a slide so everyone can read it. In the 1920s to the 1950s, doctors identified children who were born with a large thymus. And they speculated that this, having this large thymus could be a link with sudden infant death syndrome. So when they identified children with an overlarge thymus, they began to radiate them to reduce the size of their thymus, and they hoped this would reduce sudden infant death syndrome. Then they realized, after 30 years of doing this, that the kids didn't have unusually large thymus glands. What happened was they were basing their idea, their standard of the thymus glands, from bodies that had been donated to medical science. And up until that point, it tended to be poor people whose bodies were used in medical research because they couldn't afford to be buried. Poor people have smaller thymuses than regular people because they live lives of malnutrition and great stress. So actually, the standard was wrong. The condition never existed. And when they were radiating these supposedly large thymuses, they were also radiating the thyroid, and some of these kids got thyroid cancer. So they realized it didn't exist. They abolished this kind of condition and stopped treating them. So this kind just disappeared. This one I'm writing about in my column on Saturday in the Irish Independent. This is my friend Tom McEnany. Tom was one of the first people to buy a Tesla in Ireland, and he's a very energetic kind of guy. He has been working with orphanages in Belarus and prisons and all kinds of places for over 25 years. He does wonderful work doing capital investments in these places. And so he's sitting at home, he's watching the refugee crisis in Ukraine. He thinks, I just want to get in my car and go and rescue these people. But he knew it was a bit stupid just to go off and do that by himself. There's a user group for Tesla owners. He got in touch with the other Tesla owners, and a convoy, dozens of them, went off to Ukraine and had arrangements with one of the refugee groups over there. And they're bringing the refugees, driving them across Europe, often with their pets, because the pets can't get on the planes, and bringing them home. When they were driving across Europe, they met other convoys of Tesla owners from Spain and Norway who were doing the same thing. They met no other convoys of any other car users. So Tom is saying, clearly Tesla owners are a particular kind of person, and that we are the kind of people who likes to save refugees. Now I said, come on now, Tom. Tesla owners are going to be affluent, you might have time in your hands, and you've got this user group, so you have a pre-existing social network where you can actually contact each other. I drive a Citroen. I don't need to contact other Citroen owners. I'm just driving it and filling it up wherever. But he said, no, I'm onto something here. Tesla owners are idealists. We had to invest in an untested technology to save the world. We're clearly a kind of person. So we said maybe somebody will do a PhD in 10 years and see, does this identity of Tesla owners, this group of people, actually still hold up? And finally, one more for you. I am left-handed. And I can feel the difference in this hand. It's not just a question of me using it. If I close my eyes, even when they're open, I can feel my hand is different. And of course, this was a group of people, 10% of the population, who used to matter. And the word sinister, as I'm sure many of you know, denoted the left. And it was a heavily stigmatized condition. And thankfully, I'm young enough that I wasn't forced to use my right hand. But throughout my childhood, it was always mentioned and always referred to me that I was kitog. Oh, she's a kitog. Oh, she's completely kitog. My granny would wince when she'd see me picking up a pen to write. So I knew that I was left-handed. But now it doesn't matter anymore. Nobody comments on it. Nobody wants to change me. It ceased to be relevant as a group of people in society. It's still there. It simply doesn't matter anymore, except when I go into a restaurant or a cafe and I always have to move my glass, and then the waiter comes along and is confused, and I say, oh, but I'm left-handed. He says, oh, right, okay, I get it. And I suppose I could claim, I'm being discriminated against because I'm neurodiverse or something like that. But, I can accommodate myself to the world. I don't need the world to accommodate itself to me. So being left-handed is not a problem. So they're just some examples to show that we might think that certain groups in our identities are fixed. Well, of course, there's, race. Of course, there's gender. Of course, we have these groups. But actually, the degree to which we make them affect our daily lives is what's relevant, not the particular group that you're in. Now, can we evolve? And just on the theme of, does the soul have a future? What is the future of this? So some little things to consider. I don't have a grand theory, but just some ideas that might help you as you go about your day and you find yourself identifying with groups or identifying groups. The first thing is our identity changes from hour to hour, from minute to minute. So I am a woman. I'm from Meath. I'm a driver. I'm a cyclist. I'm a MacBook user. I'm all these different things. And from minute to minute, my identity changes. So when I'm driving, I am cursing cyclists. Jesus Christ, wrong side of the road, breaking lights. Can they not wear some high vis? When I'm cycling, I'm, for God's sake, why are you trying to kill me? I'm just trying to get across the road here to take this shortcut. So our whole perspective on our life changes, and who we are and who we think other people are. There's a really nice example of, which Percy mentions in his book, of an English settler who was captured by the Shawnee tribes in America, and he found himself in shackles with a black man who'd been a slave, and they could both speak English. And he was saying, normally I would never associate with this person. I wouldn't have had anything to do with him, but we could both speak English and we were both prisoners. So because of our circumstances, we actually became friends. And I realized, he is a human just like me. And we kept this friendship up all our lives, even after we had escaped. So their status and circumstances as a prisoner changed who they were to each other. Some people suggest what they call the contact hypothesis, so that this system of being close to somebody can help us see the person and not just the kind of group that they are. Percy argues that's not necessarily always the case, that the way and the manner in which you have contact depends on how successful that process is. So, in fact, sometimes in certain circumstances, if you're in contact with someone from another group, it might actually make you more prejudiced. So this can happen sometimes in American colleges, where we know these issues are very intensely debated, where there's affirmative action and maybe different groups are brought into the college, and sometimes this can actually create more resentment and make things worse. What's important with contact is the process. So they do a lot of work like this with kids. You put a bunch of kids at a table, and they're different religions or different races, and you get them working at a common task. And they get so absorbed in the common task, they stop seeing the difference and the identity, and they're just getting on with the other kids because they're working together on this. And they get to see that someone is funny and kind, and not that they're black or a redhead or fat or whatever it is. So the process of contact is really, really important. But also, interestingly, you don't even need contact to develop empathy with other humans. And we do this all the time, as many people are doing with the refugees, or when there's a famine or a disaster. We see families on the television and we feel sorry for them, and we donate money to help them. So, so you don't have to be personally connected to the person. You can feel a connection even when you don't personally meet them, and I think that's important. Then there's morality. So, we teach our children to be kind, not to bully. you know, lots of societies have their a strong sense of morality, help the poor, feed the hungry, all of that. But that's never any guarantor of good behavior, because what people will do is they'll say, well, yes, we behave this certain way to our kind, but not them. Them we burn. A good example of this is in Cromwell's time, the Protestant Reformation, all of that in England during the Civil War, where there actually was quite a significant degree of freedom of conscience. So Cromwell believed in freedom of conscience and that people mostly should be allowed to practice their religion. He didn't even particularly mind Catholics believing in what they believed, provided they didn't practice it externally. But once they did, well, his freedom of conscience arguments ended, and then we burn. So morality has its limits and is not necessarily protection if we limit that sense of morality to our own kind. Then there's brainwashing. And this, you see this a lot with soldiers in wars, where they've been taught to dehumanize the enemy and kill them anyway. And but Berube goes through a lot of interviews with soldiers, and for instance, there's one with a bomber during World War II, who says that the moment when that bomb goes down, he had to try so hard not to think of children in their beds that he knew he was killing. And he had a lovely quote from a French soldier when the French were the colonizers of Haiti, who said that our common humanity makes us weep. So that they knew the way they were treating the natives was wrong, and that they have to work really, really hard with soldiers to keep persuading them to kill. It's hard to keep it up because our instincts are to see that common humanity. This was this awareness was used very successfully in the same-sex marriage campaign throughout the world. When Barack Obama was elected, which is not that long ago, even at that stage, it wasn't kind of acceptable for a mainstream leader like him to say that he supported same-sex marriage. And that whole thing turned around completely. And what they've identified, what changed in that campaign, was that the campaigners moved from a rights-based argument, well, we are this group, and we should have the same rights as everyone else, to we are just like you, we're families. Showed lots of pictures of, you know, same-sex couples with children. And by emphasizing what they had in common with everybody else, they were able to successfully change all our minds about what they should and shouldn't be allowed to do. So emphasizing what we have, but what we do the same, rather than emphasizing our difference, was what made it such an acceptable thing in a relatively short space of time. Political scientists have looked at this, and I mean, it happened over 5 to 6 years, and in all of Western society, not just in Ireland. So where does this lead us? Let me just see, what have we got here? Sorry, I'm going to come out here that. Oh, this. So I'm friendly with Oliver Sears, who's an art gallery owner and dealer here in Ireland. His mother and grandmother escaped from a concentration camp in Poland. You should keep an eye out for his story. It's absolutely amazing. And he did this wonderful collaboration with the Belfast painter Colin Davidson. And I'm sure you're familiar with, you might not think you know his portraits, but the second you see them, you do, because he's done the Queen and Seamus Heaney, and he paints everybody, and it's a very distinctive style. And Oliver's very friendly with Philippe Sands, the Anglo-French human rights lawyer, who's also Jewish and whose family also were victims of the Holocaust in Poland. They're both Polish Jews. And Philippe has written an amazing book I recommend to you, East-West Street. It's about the story of his own family, but more it's about the story of two lawyers who both came from a town in which moves according to the borders, but is sometimes in Poland, called Łódź. And they were the two lawyers who developed the legal philosophies behind the Nuremberg trials. And the two options that they had for the trials were the crime of genocide and the crime of crimes against humanity. And in the end, for Nuremberg, they went with genocide, which was that they were putting the Nazis on trial because they had killed Jews because they were Jews. Crimes against humanity is a slightly different crime. You're being put on trial because you killed millions of people, and it's wrong to kill people. It's a crime against humanity. So they went with genocide in the end. But Sands argues that he thinks that's a mistake. So he's done lots of work in places like Rwanda and post-conflict societies. And he says that when you embed the crimes in identity, that people were killed because they were Tutsis, it makes resolution in afterwards very, very hard because people are still bedded down in their identity. And I think this is a mistake we've made in Northern Ireland, which I'm going to come on to. So in this collection of portraits, which Colin did, they went to Jerusalem and they picked 4 Jews, 4 Christians, 4 Arabs. I've put some of their names up there, and they were all different kinds of people: university professors, a hotel worker, a woman who'd founded a film festival. And they had this amazing exhibition where you went into the room and the 12 portraits were there of these people, but they didn't tell you who they were. Their names or their religion or identity were not underneath the paintings. So you went around. So if you want to scroll through them, yeah. So I found myself going through these paintings and trying to stare into the eyes of some of the people. Which one is that? Kind of looks like an Arab. Is that the Christian? Is that the Jew? And I found I was trying to search for some kind of meaning, if I could figure out which one was which. Were they the bad guys? Were they the good guys? And it really brought it home to me how much we think that if we know what someone is, it will tell us, you know, what kind of person they are. And it's wrong, and we know it's wrong, but it's incredible how powerful it is. So, yeah, and so, yeah. So these are the fires in Northern Ireland last week. And I'm sure you saw effigies of Michelle O'Neill, you know, being hung. It was, I mean, just the sectarian hatred, you know, that we saw is just still shocking to us. But going back to Philippe Sands' point, you know, about identity, fine, they had to do the Good Friday Agreement the way they had to do it and get people to work in a government together, and there'd be this mandated system of, well, you had to have so many unionists, you had to have so many nationalists. But the result, I think, is that people have not moved on. They're still embedded in their identity, whatever it is, nearly 25 years later. And we have all this casual talk now. Oh, yeah, we're going to have a border poll. Yeah, there'll be a border poll in 10 years. It's on the way, it's going to come. As if it's fine, as if it doesn't really matter. But I think because that work has never been done, because people are still embedded in their identities, and the hearts and minds have not moved on, as we have seen, that a poll will unleash these really primal culture wars again that are already violent and could get more violent. And even if they're not violent, look at what English nationalism has done in the United Kingdom. They are destroying themselves because, you know, well, we're not Europeans, we wanted to be English. Probably result in the breakup of the entire United Kingdom, the money they're wasting, the harm it's doing, and that we're going to walk down this same path despite the template that we've got there without that hard work having been put in. And as long as these kind of scenes, and by the way, I don't want to just say, oh, it's only the loyalists who are doing this. I absolutely firmly believe Republicans are doing it in a sneakier way. But we have no clue what we're walking into. And I think we walk down that identity path at our peril. So I think it's something everybody probably should think about, you know, as these talks of who's who and who we are get going. So they're my thoughts on the subject. And does Ireland have a future? And who are the people within our communities that we're maybe not yet fully reconciled to? And maybe if we do think about this a little bit better and do see the humanity in each other a little bit better, maybe we have a better chance of saving the world. Thank you.